Mr. Speaker, let me thank the gentleman from Texas for yielding. And I want to point out something about Mr. Gohmert. He was speaking about our military a moment ago. He himself is a veteran, served in the United States Army during the Vietnam War, and I appreciate your service. Mr. Speaker, I wanted also to share something with the body today. I write a weekly report, generally called the Fort Report, and this week I sent one that I had hoped would have broader meaning to the House of Representatives and perhaps anyone else who might encounter this. It's entitled Nebraska Values. Mr. Speaker, stories about America's political and economic and cultural crises, as we all know, they're dominating the headlines across our nation. There is widespread bipartisan dissatisfaction with the status quo, and it's propelling a new conversation against the dysfunction and gridlock that have long thwarted effective government here in Washington, D.C. As families across our nation face pressing challenges, it's sad, but elected officials often prioritize divisive rhetoric instead of empathy and understanding. And now our disagreements widened into chasms. It's exhausting to America's spirit, and it is distracting us from the possibilities that are before us. And in the midst of this contentious presidential primary season, Mr. Speaker, maybe it's time to just pause, to change the subject and celebrate some of the best examples that our country has to offer. In a small-town gym in Beamer, Nebraska, at Beamer Elementary School, the community recently gathered to celebrate the life of Joseph Lim. While deep sadness marked the occasion, the community's desire to gather and tell stories and honor this remarkable man pointed to a much deeper understanding of the values that bind us. Joe chose to put on 3 different uniforms in his life. First, by enlisting in the United States Air Force after high school. Then he went on to have a career with the New York City Police Department, and finally with the New York Air National Guard. Joe served 3 tours of duty in Iraq and Afghanistan. This past December, Joseph Lim gave his all for his country, along with 5 other Americans who were killed in Afghanistan. Although Joe left Nebraska a very long time ago, I'm quite certain that he carried his early formation with him throughout this life of service, and I suspect my state, Nebraska, was never far from Joe's heart. Before the service that memorialized him, I saw Joe's mother, Shirley. Shirley embraced me as though we were family members, and perhaps we were. Our governor, Governor Ricketts, and United States Senator Sass, the same way. Everyone in the gym in the little town of Beamer knew, in the midst of this deep grief and loss, that Joseph Lim's life had great value, had great purpose. Mr. Speaker, several weeks ago, Washington, D.C. was buried in an avalanche of snow, the remnants of which are still around. And I was intending to come back to Washington, but had to cancel that trip. And I had more time than I anticipated in my hometown of Lincoln. And as I was in my office, I noticed some young people walking around the complex in their signature blue Future Farmers of America jackets, the FFA jackets. I love those jackets, Mr. Speaker, with they're emblazoned with the name of their hometown below the FFA symbol. And these young people had gathered along with others from the distributed education clubs of America, the future business leaders of America, the family, career, and community leaders of America, Educators Rising, and Future Health Professional Skills USA, to talk about a very important issue, to talk about food security. In Nebraska, we are very fortunate to have a very, very low unemployment rate. We have the convergence of some extraordinary natural resources, our farming and ranch community. We have manufacturing. We have a financial sector. We have had a long tradition of solid community leadership, which has left our economic situation much better than most across the country. But even so, even in our state, we face problems with structural poverty. These young students came together because they recognized the need to engage in the issue of children who face hunger, children who return from school hungry, children who have to worry about not enough to eat when they get up in the morning. These young people were there gathered to lead the way, to find real-time solutions in their own small communities to help the impoverished, vulnerable members who are all around them. Mr. Speaker, that same snowstorm that kept me out of Washington, though, it did not deter hundreds of other Nebraska students who left the comforts of their homes and drove through the night on buses to exercise their fundamental American rights, the freedom to assemble and the freedom of speech. In the face of that devastating blizzard a couple weeks ago, these principled boys and girls participated in the annual March for Life. They are young people in our country who refuse to accept the current settlement in our wounded culture. They refuse to stare at pain and woundedness and then walk away. They refuse to accept what has been fostered upon us for the last 4 decades of brokenness, of fracturing in family life, and the deep wounds that abortion has caused in so many women. They're demanding that we do better as a country. They're saying to all of us that women deserve better. We deserve better. They traveled to Washington to explicitly express this pro-life perspective and proclaim that we should care for unborn children, their mothers, and our society as a whole. This is the new generation, the millennial generation, that in many ways is standing upon the ash heap of broken tradition, and they are longing for more. And they're saying there is a better way, no matter how deep and difficult the problem is. And although our nation, and this body particularly, experiences deep and sad divisions over the question of abortion, I do think we should all commend these students for responsibly exercising their rights, to peaceably demonstrating, to standing up for what they believe. That's a source of renewal and strength in America. Sometimes it discomforts us. Sometimes it challenges those of us in power when truth is spoken to us. Sometimes it bumps up against systems that seem stacked against the ordinary person. These young people are not willing to accept the current economic, political, and cultural settlement in our country. They're saying, let's strive for more. Let's imagine what we could be. Let's put aside the pain. Let's heal the past and look forward when all life is celebrated as a beautiful gift. I respect what they did. And I think, again, all of us here can look to these young people who have responsibly demonstrated in front of us as future stewards, good future stewards of a rebuilt America. So, Mr. Speaker, that's really what I wanted to say to you today. I'm proud of these Nebraskans who have continued to demonstrate a better pathway for America. In public servants and military heroes such as Joseph Lem, who gave his life for his country. In the young people back home who are deciding to tackle systemic childhood poverty and hunger. And the students who trekked all this way in hazardous conditions to stand in defense of vulnerable persons. Perhaps in the example of these young people, we can find an answer to what is right about America at a time when so much seems to be going wrong. We can carry forward the best of our traditions, those put forward by small communities and families, and are really the renewing social force that will help turn our country around. Again, I want to thank the gentleman from Texas, my good friend, Mr. Gomert, for yielding me the time.
Claiming time, I'm very grateful to my friend from Nebraska, Mr. Fortenberry, and I came in together, and I'm so glad we did. Been friends ever since. And what noteworthy tribute he had to pay. I'm grateful for that tribute.